Yes, friends, on a Monday of the regular season, NFL football is officially upon us. We have a team on tap in the Tennessee Titans that we are going to break down all week long here on OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Arbrecht breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast with my boy Doug Norrie. And yonder there, more than ever before, the season generational ticket holder, the healthy, wealthy, and wise, Mr. Andrew Makowitz.
I'm feeling good, Adam. It was great to be able to get together with you over the weekend. Adam and
Memories.
family host a very memorable party every year called the Hootenanny. Love it. Had a great time. My son was jumping around, having a good time. He ended up with the biggest stick for the s'more game, and that was really all he cared about. So
I got to tell you, he incited, as we could only assume, a little bit of a riot around some of the kids that were attending. But that was obviously a lot of fun. Kind of an end of the summer. We all know, right? Beginning of September, everything starts to turn over. And if you're a NFL fan, it really starts to turn the corner on it. And as I said at the top here, we're going to do all this season long. We're going to every single week come in. We're going to highlight what team we're coming up against, how we look offensively, how we look defensively, and then ultimately what we think is going to happen in that game, what we want to watch for, where the Giants can try to have some success. And also at the back end of the week, some of those betting lines, some of that fantasy props, right? We're going to have a nice, what we're going to call a smorgasbord throughout the week for you, all leading up to those key matchups. But because this is the beginning of the official NFL season, and there was, even all the way through last week, so much still going on for the New York Football Giants and every team in a lot of ways. There is a little bit of a reflection that we want to have here, Andy. Before we do, though, because I don't want to get this out of the way, we're going to do some bonus content around this. This will be outside of the purview of episodes on a weekly basis, but I will be keeping an eye on one position at the college level, and that is quarterback, because it will matter potentially as we keep an eye on how things are going for Daniel Jones and the New York Football Giants. In that vein, are you aware of any young quarterbacks that maybe led their team to a game-winning drive on Saturday and kind of started to create that buzz that I was talking about a few weeks ago in terms of one that could be climbing up the ranks of the NFL draft boards?
yeah, listen, even though this is sometimes a family show, I did put a wager in on Utah, thinking that they were going to win. And, when they march down the field and they have the ball at the 4-yard line and then they inexplicably throw a pick with 20 seconds to go, it makes Adam's prediction of, Richardson, right? Is it Anthony Richardson? Is that?
Oh, it's Anthony, baby.
I mean, it makes your prediction look very good because he was the talk of the town. That fake spin move that he did to be able to get out of pressure and be able to find a guy in the corner of the end zone. That's like the highlight tape that if he's going on a Heisman, run right now, that's the one that you frame like the Desmond Howard, right?
Oh, of course. Listen, and seasons are, as we all know, seasons are long, and we'll see how things unfold. But it's certainly, it gave you kind of all of that taste that you wanted. And really the biggest part for him, we're going to move off this quickly, but we're going to do this for all the quarterbacks, all the key positions the Giants may need. It's a great bonus piece we want to work on this year. But listen, he throws for 176 yards. He rushes for over 100. He runs for 3 touchdowns, and he makes some key clutch plays in clutch moments throughout that game, right? Like, that's what matters. A ranked team in Utah, a statement win, a team that wants to be on the rise. So it's like, listen, hey, as you say, when you think you call it right, you're going to take that victory lap early and often. We don't know what happens the rest of the season, but that's just where my third or fifth eye is watching over there.
Well, Adam, with all of the winnings that you've already counted from the Anthony Richardson sweepstakes, were you the one that put the big auction bid in on Hakeem Nicks' Super Bowl ring? I didn't know if you got the update on that one.
I did not. I was thinking about it. I checked the offshore accounts. It wasn't quite there.
So you must have just missed out. So it wasn't you. We talked about how much it was potentially going to go for. If you had to guess, ballpark, what do you think the ring went for?
$83,000.
Hakeem Nicks' Super Bowl ring went for $117,000. So someone paid up tremendously to be ballpark. What's like 30, 40 grand between friends, right, Adam?
That's all I'm saying.
But yeah, it's wild. I mean, he's giving away some to charity. Others had talked to Hakeem Nicks. People were concerned about his kind of like well-being, whether or not he had money. People close to him say, don't worry about it. It was just something that he could share with other people, give some money to charity, moving on to a new era. So
how terrible is it as we move on to the new era of the New York Football Giants that the first thing everyone thinks is like, is he all right? Like a guy
Right.
genuinely, Hakeem Nicks said, I have this thing. What am I really doing with it on a day-to-day basis? I could give some away, blah, 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 be charitable. And everyone goes, oh, buddy, all right.
Down on your luck?
Yeah, like sometimes just go with the good story and be happy about it. All right. That being the case then, good, happy time stories. We're not going to do this any more than this one time, Andy, because this is about the upcoming season. It's about so many things that we're going to discuss. But we all know that last year was a year that we had some optimism, that we had some hope around what was possible for the Giants organization, in spite of some of the concerns, some of the issues we had with Dave Gettleman as the GM, the decision that he made, Joe Judge. We wanted to give him that second year to really show that some of that old school football mentality was going to pay off. Whether it's from injuries, inconsistency, ultimately Daniel Jones gets hurt, 3/4 of the way through the year, he misses a big chunk of time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all unravels and falls apart. And now we see kind of the fallout from that in a lot of ways, because you cannot keep together a roster that was around for so much bad play on, off, in, and around the New York Football Giants field.
It was just a whole host of terrible issues. Like we said, we're not going to completely rehash the past, but on Mondays for the show, we are going to come back and kind of do like a what happened yesterday if the Giants played on a Sunday. But instead for today, we're going through like the 5 or 10 minute what happened last year that got us to this point, right? Like why are we here? And really, the culmination of losing 8 straight games at the end of the season probably doesn't bode well for all the people that were responsible for putting that team together or coaching that team.
Sure.
So, only winning 4 games last year and bottoming it out basically meant that Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge could no longer be here. And Adam, I remember thinking in my mind, like, oh, could Joe Judge stick around? Are they going to keep him because he's well liked by the players in the locker room? You fast forward a few months and you kind of say, aren't you kind of glad that they just went in a completely different direction? Like, aren't you glad that they didn't kick the can down the road even further with some of these contracts and people in the building?
Well, and remember too, right? Why was the reason we were having those thoughts? Because John Mara had for so long been willing to go down that extra step on the road, right? A little bit further. So when you think, could they bring back Joe Judge? It felt like, well, John Mara's loyal. He may be willing to, but it took, to your point, that bad of an end of a season, that much dysfunction, it seemed like, around the organization for John Mara. You can put on the blinders, but at some point those things get snapped off, and all of a sudden you're hit with all the things that aren't going well. And to your point, you go out, you look at some of the better run organizations around the league in recent years. The Buffalo Bills are one of them. You get Joe Shane, you get Brian Dable, you get Mike Kafka, you get Wink Martindale. And as we say, now we jump off on this foot of, hey, we can turn this over here and start to go forward. And nothing showed that more than what happened with this roster from last year to this year as well.
Well, it's even strange as we were changing over the coaching staff in the front office. It's like people forgot about the Patrick Graham fiasco, where it's like he put his name in the ring to be the head coach because the players knew him and he had a bunch of familiarity. And then he didn't get the job with Brian Dable. Whoopsies. And then Brian Dable was like, no, but I still would love you to be in our building with us. And it was like, he basically told everyone that Patrick Graham was going to be the defensive coordinator. And then like all of a sudden overnight, he just flew to the Las Vegas Raiders and took the job with the Raiders because he was frustrated with how things ended with Joe Judge. Like that was a fiasco in and of itself. And it does feel good to completely wipe the slate clean. 2 top 10, draft picks in the first round for the Giants give you like this real big influx of talent, high end premium talent. A guy in Evan Neal at right tackle, which is a position that we've been slamming on the table to address for quite a while, and the edge rushing position with a larger than life guy like Kayvon Thibodeau. It really does feel like, changing the coaching staffs, changing the GM, getting 2 top end talents, one on offense, one on defense, really did like kind of change the way we perceive this Giants team.
Yeah, and that's what you need to do. You need to look at the areas of need and address them. So, like we say, we're not going to belabor the point about where we came from. Understanding, though, I think the way it ties into this season is that there has been a lot of turnover on this roster. We mentioned it last week. Waiver claims start going in. Not a lot of guys that got let go by the Giants got claimed by other teams, right? The Giants, Joe Shane, this organization is still working forward and working through, trying to move on from a lot of pieces, trying to move on from a lot of money. Blake Martinez was the big storyline, obviously, from the end of last week as well. So it's not the process is not done yet, by the way, right? Because we already even saw them make another move here at the in the secondary, excuse me, at the cornerback position, trying to turn this over. And they brought in Andy, someone who, in theory, could be out there being a contributor early on in his tenure with the Giants because he has 76 appearances and 30 plus starts in the NFL.
Yeah, Fabian Moreau from the Atlanta Falcons, defensive back, cornerback, has a ton of experience. Is 28 years old, so it's not like ton of experience, aged, washed veteran.
Mhm.
Ton of experience, like still potentially in his prime. Don't be surprised with how thin the cornerback room can be looking for the Giants. If he was just signed to the practice squad, but it feels like that's might be just like procedural, transactional.
Mhm.
I would expect him to move up into, potentially onto the 53 as soon as the Titans game this Sunday, because the Giants do need depth and help in the secondary. Having a veteran like him who's still 28 years old, who has some familiarity with Wink Martindale's system, as he kind of worked with Wink Martindale's predecessor in Baltimore for a little bit. So there's some continuity there, even though they may have not worked together, on the same team at one point.
Yeah, and by the way, so I know I want to make sure we got that in there in this conversation. We're going to tap back into that throughout the week and where these matchups are going to look against the Tennessee Titans. But the other part of it was just to round out from last year coming into this year and some of the things that will look different. This came across from Art Stapleton earlier this morning. The Week 1 starters from 2021 who will not be in the starting lineup for Sunday against the Titans. Now, this is both a combination of injuries and releases. When we say something like Shane Lemieux, Nick Gates, those would fall underneath the injury category. But we mentioned guys like right guard Will Hernandez, right tackle Nate Solder, fullback Eli Penny, Austin Johnson, defensive lineman, outside linebacker Lorenzo Carter, inside linebacker Blake Martinez, cornerback James Bradbury, safeties Logan Ryan and Jabril Peppers. That really crystallizes how much is changed in just a short one off season, right? It's not just a year. This is months. And this is what we've seen in the turnover. An expectation that you talked about, by the way, going back to the end of last year. And I think setting the table as we're coming out, it was, turnover is always a part of the NFL. But when you're a rebuilding franchise, the turnover can magnify. And we talk about a third of the roster can turn over. The Giants, I have to go and look, right? They're probably closer to 50% of this roster being turned over this year.
Art Stapleton put a follow-up tweet out because I was asking myself the same question, Adam. 23 players that were on the 53-man roster to start week 1 are no longer here. So think about how crazy that number is. 23 out of 53 of the guys that were on this team are no longer here. We talk about 25% of the roster turning over. That's more like 45% of the roster turning over. And that's why in the NFL, you see a ton of teams that can go from worst to first really quickly, because when you turn over 50% of the roster, it really does swing the pendulum in the other direction. This isn't like the NBA where there's 5 guys on the court, and if you have 2 or 3 all-stars on there, you're pretty much set in where you're going to be. The NFL, they say it's not for long for careers, but it's also not for long for staying at the top, because you've got to turn these rosters over constantly.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big important things that I thought about too is when you think about all of those players that left, some of them were cut by the Giants, others went as free agents to other places, and finally, some are still waiting for their opportunity with another team like Nate Solder or others. But Adam, what speaks volumes about the talent that walked out the door is Austin Johnson is basically the only one that got more than a 1-year prove-it deal from any team. Every other guy, whether it's Evan Ingram, Will Hernandez, even when we released James Bradbury, he signed a 1-year contract. Jabril Peppers, everyone that we're talking about that left this team that has signed elsewhere, Adam, has had no security. It's not a multi-year deal. It means that the desire for the Giants players that are no longer here wasn't that high on the open market to begin with.
No, and then that's again, what I think is upsetting about that in some regards, and not to look too far back. Remember, it was a couple of years ago when Joe Judge was brought in, even though that was still a layover with Dave Gettleman, where we were saying the same thing. Right? Guys that were on the roster, guys that have been starting, David Mayo from last year, you name all these guys and you think about how it was, you're going to have that first year where you clear it out, and, a failing even of the previous regime, was also just getting rid of some of that dead weight, going with younger talent, getting youth in the door. So worst case, you feel like you're developing that. And there are some of those bright spots. We obviously know Azeez Ojulari is still a part of this. Even a guy like O'Shane Ximines on a lower level. You have Xavier McKinney on the back end, right? Andrew Thomas. So like there are these guys that do exist there. And it was one of the things I think when we go from last year to this year and remembering that coaching matters. And we've said that before, but it doesn't seem to be any more significant than this offseason where there are guys, Julian Love, that legitimately I think have gone from being, boy, I don't know, can this guy really stick around for the Giants? Is he worth keeping to, hey, this is a captain on this roster, or this is a player that whose role and responsibilities are going to greatly increase coming into a year where you feel like clear orders, clear, mindset around what expectations are on both sides of the ball as well.
Yeah, and the crazy part about it, Adam, is last year the defense kind of had this idea of like bend, don't break, don't give up the big plays, just try to keep us in the game because they're trying to manufacture points, right? Like the offense is struggling so mightily that we're trying to manufacture points. So just don't give up too many points. Keep us in the game and maybe we'll narrowly escape. And you know what that ended up with? The Giants were 15.2 points per game on offense, which was second worst in the entire league. And they were 23rd in the league in defensive points per game given up at 24.5. So the Giants were giving up 10 more points a game than they were scoring, which is why we got
ratio.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah, not is that good?
It's almost impressive if you get 4 wins in that regard.
Is that good? And so to me, the whole idea is Wink Martindale is also saying like, okay, with Daboll and Kafka on offense and with these dynamic weapons, like we want to pressure and we want to dictate what's going to happen. It's okay to give up a big play because there is no way that this offense is going to be scoring 15.2 points a game just based on the creativity and scheming alone of Kafka and Daboll.
Yeah, 100%. Brief pause here inside of our live. Obviously, we've been doing this. I think this is the new format as well, something we haven't talked about. The live show on YouTube in the morning all week long. That's how we're going to be producing it. The times will shift a little bit, but then you can go catch it on the podcast as well, obviously. But quick shout out to guys like Tyrone, who's been in here on these live sessions, like Beef Onito, who's been a part of this as well. LJ coming in too. Everyone that's coming on these lives, we really appreciate it, including one Rudy Louise or Lewis. I don't know. You have to tell me. Roldy, excuse me. Oh, wow. Finally got both of us on the live together. Big fan. We are doing absolutely fantastic. Why? Because it's New York Football Giants. The season has begun. Optimism reigns supreme when we think about the possibility of what could be. So shout out to you, Roldy, not Rudy. Although, if you want to have a bit of an underdog story, you could always think about changing your name. Could be good for the Giants. I'm not telling you how you live your life, Roldy. But you mentioned it there when we talk about this team and this expectation. So when we look going forward here and heading into this year, you have the over-under for Giants wins. And I think we can talk about that a little bit. But I also think it's interesting to look at the defensive and offensive side of the ball and say, like, what are your expectations there as well? Because I do have a cautious concern, specifically on the defensive side of the ball and Wink Martindale and the system that he runs.
So it's tough. We're going to go into, specifically the Tennessee Titans and the matchups on offense and defense. But this is just a very like overarching picture. Adam, as you know, I am the eternal optimist on the pod for Daniel Jones. So for me, what I think is, the Giants averaging 15 points a game last year. Now, Daniel Jones was hurt. There were other factors that went into it, but that number is going to come up. The question is, how much can it come up? And to me, it's like, if the Giants score 7 more points and they get into the 20s and they're at 22 points a game, like that's progress. We're getting closer to them what the defense gave up last season. Now, there are tons of question marks on the defensive side of the ball, but on offense, it's fair to think that the Giants could put up one more touchdown just with guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, Saquon Barkley healthy, Sterling Shepard back, and a better scheme overall with Kafka and Daboll trying to get people into space. Would you think I'm crazy if I said 22 points a game should be where the Giants offense is at least expecting themselves to be?
No, I think they should be they should be exciting offense to watch. It's not something we've been able to say about this team in a long time, right? All health being considered. I mean, listen, we can put the Daniel Jones conversation on the shelf for a minute. If Saquon Barkley is healthy and out there, we know that he's one of the more dynamic playmakers in the league. You combine that with the guys you're talking about, a Kadarius Toney, a Wan'Dale Robinson, see what happens at the tight end position. We're not calling Daniel Bellinger, a stud freak athlete, but a beneficiary of what's going on around him, of course, right? Like there's plenty of things to be excited about, including the offensive line and what could happen there. Yes, more points. They have to be able to. I mean, if you can't, just by bringing in Mike Kafka, don't even think about Brian Dable even, just Mike Kafka alone, right? That offensive mind from Kansas City, if you can't manufacture more scoring opportunities and the ability to score more touchdowns with those opportunities, then if they're not scoring over 20 points a game this season, we got we got a
long issues.
Yeah, we got a whole new list of issues.
And to that point, Adam, what I'm saying, I don't think is unreasonable. Saying the Giants to score 7 more points a game based on getting a better offensive line. They addressed it in the first round on the right tackle. Going out and the only big free agent signing was a guard. Like getting Saquon Barkley back healthy. Adam, 22 points a game would put them either 16th or 17th in the NFL in scoring.
It'd be middle of the pack.
It would put them dead middle of the road. So, like, the expectation isn't, can this be a top 5 offense? Can it compete with the Kansas City Chiefs? The idea is, like, can we be middle of the pack based on having guys healthy, new scheme, new system, new fit? If the answer is no, then we clearly know it says a whole lot about the offensive coaching staff, but also probably Daniel Jones in the same breath. But I at least expect this offense to be able to score middle of the pack in the NFL.
And you're seeing it from a few people in the chat too, Roldy being among them, about a transitional year that this is going to be. And I think that is very much going to be true. And everyone has that expectation. A lot of young players you want to see develop. Maybe we'll get excited as the year progresses and you start to see some guys hitting their stride. When we look over at the defensive side of the ball, the reason why I brought up a little bit of a cautious concern is because go back and look at the Baltimore Ravens last year. As their secondary suffered injury upon injury, all of a sudden the Wink Martindale system starts to suffer, right? Because you want to bring that pressure. You're going to leave your guys out on an island on the back end. And already right now, we've seen Azeez Ojulari had some little injuries. Kayvon Thibodeau avoided a season ender, but is still going to be brought along here slowly. And we'll see how he looks going in towards the Tennessee game as the week progresses. You lost a guy in Darian Beavers. We're not overstating it, but that's the reality. He was maybe building towards being a contributor. And you get rid of certain players from whether from last year, talking about James Bradbury, or just moments ago with Blake Martinez, a guy that I'm fine to have moved on from him. And also, there is now a gap there, right? So the Tay Crowder, Micah McFadden-led, defensive linebacking core, all of these things combined with the secondary, I think growing pains are going to come on the defensive side of the ball as well, where everyone's going to be doing the right thing, the right way, in the right spots. And also, there are still 3 or 4 more maybe talent holes that need to get filled here. Fascinating to see adding another DB, having Tony Jefferson, right? Trying to fill those gaps there, I think, for the Giants on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and you just mentioned it. There is some big concern on the defensive side of the ball. I love that we're bringing pressure because pressure actually makes, the situation speed up much, much faster for an offense. So you may just get lucky by them not having enough time to read defenses and make mistakes. That part I like. The issue is when you're talking about Carter Coughlin, Micah McFadden, Tay Crowder, and Aaron Robinson, as of right now, potentially starting across this entire 11-man front, that is scary to me, knowing how young that group is that Wink Martindale is going to be leaning upon. And listen, I am fully with everyone. There is this transition period. There's no more Logan Ryan. There's no more Jabril Peppers. There's no more Blake Martinez. We all thought he was going to be here, but they're saying we are turning over a new leaf. And as you can see, Joe Shane throughout this entire piece of it, Adam, has been genuine and authentic and spot on with what he wanted to do. He said, I do not want to kick the can down the road as much as humanly possible. And he's really actually lived up to that, right? Like he'd rather cut Blake Martinez or just, outright release James Bradbury. Doesn't want to restructure. He has stayed true to that. And with that, there is going to be some bumps in the road here. Like not restructuring means you're going to either lose talent or you're not freeing up money to go out and get other talent to fill out the backside of the roster.
Yeah, but you have to do it. And I think the one thing I'll say here, and then I want to talk about the over under for the season wins, and we'll get out the door here. As Andy said, as we said at the top, one, appreciate everyone being on the live, and we're going to keep doing them all season long. Tomorrow, we start turning our attention to the Tennessee Titans, talking about the offensive and defensive side of the ball, presenting what they've done to improve themselves, where they're coming from as a team, and how we stack up against them. That's what we'll build as we work towards the Sunday matchup and the start of the Giants NFL season. But for some reason, perceptually, and you hear this especially when it comes to like to baseball a lot of times. Oh, it's the Yankees, it's New York, the Mets now having a really great season. It's the market, you can't have off seasons, you can't have bad years, you can't rebuild. The fan base won't tolerate it, which I appreciate. I don't think any fan base wants to lose, but somehow the media market saying like, hey, it's a big deal because you're New York. Well, guess what that can do? That can lead you to not doing the right thing as soon as you should have. And that means accepting that you're in a rebuild 4 years ago instead of this offseason, right? And that's the biggest, I think, shift here as well. The perception of saying this is a rebuild, and finally, and I get why, but finally the Giants fan base collectively seems to have all gotten to that place of, yeah, it was bad as it could be. And not only as bad as it could be, but also we understand what it means going forward here. So I actually think the fan base overall has a level of patience coming into this year that they did not have the last 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, because they finally are, quote unquote, tearing it down to the studs, right? Like it felt like we were kind of trying to reload on the fly. Dave Gettleman restructuring,
and that confuses the fan base, by the way, right? Like it makes the fan base think,
we're this close to competing.
Yep,
we're this close to making a Super Bowl run. When in actuality, Adam, we were never really that close. We weren't. We were not that team. We didn't have the level of talent. We still aren't 100% sure if we have the quarterback of our future. And so why mortgage the future for today when you don't think that you have it just yet, right? Like, and so to your point, when we talk about the New York Giants right now, depending on if you're on a couple different betting websites, right now they either have the Giants at over under at 7 wins or at 7.5 wins, where you get a little bit of a bigger payout, where 7 isn't a push, it goes to 8. When I tell you that is the number, what does that make you think? So basically they're saying they're probably right around 7 and 10.
Yeah. I think that for me, coming in on the front foot here, I look at it as the Giants are going to get better as the year goes on, hopefully, find their rhythm as the year goes on. I don't want to overstate anything around what happens with Daniel Jones, and maybe something there ends up creating a little bit of stability if it isn't going well, or that he's getting progressively better in the system. But I think the start of the season, where there are some winnable games, could end up being losses for everything that we've highlighted here, right? I think it's going to be a gradual process getting off the ground, and I want to be pleasantly surprised. We'll see what happens in the first game, right? But that's my perception, and I don't know, as this season and offseason has gone on, combined with not just what they're doing as an organization, but also some of the injuries that they've sustained and choices that they've had to make. It's hard for me to right now in this moment sit here and say, "Oh, give me the over, baby." Like they're gonna get to 8 wins. That's a real hard stretch, including one aspect we're gonna get into during this week and throughout the season as we build towards it. What the division looks like and the schedule overall.
It's tough because I do what every fan does, Adam. I look at the schedule, I go down the list, and I'm like, loss, win, win, win,
That
loss, win.
classic game we all love to play.
You just pick. Everyone does it. It's okay to admit it. It's fine. The issue that I have is like the games that you already put in the win column for the Giants is like what, 4 games, maybe 5 games, and those are the games that you would expect. It's like the stretch of the Jaguars and the Seahawks and the Texans and maybe the Lions. The Bears, maybe, we get the Panthers early. So those are the games that you kind of put in the win column. And then the rest, you're like, ooh, I don't know. Are we going to beat the Ravens? Are we going to beat the Packers? Like those feel like very tough games for the Giants.
Well,
Go ahead.
And by the way, because I'm doing some double duty here, just trying to keep an eye on some things on the side. But by the way, though, all the teams you list, like the Chicago Bears, right? And rightfully we go, that's a winnable game. The Chicago Bears are saying that's a winnable game. Like the Giants are the winnable game on a lot of team schedules. And the question becomes, which of all these teams, the Giants are included in them, end up being one of those surprising teams this year, right?
Well,
that's the question.
And to that point, you were going right down the path that I was saying, is like the wins that you put in the Giants win column feel less confident than the losses I've put in the loss column for the Giants, right? It's like, what's more likely, that the Texans upset the Giants or the Giants upset the Packers, right? Like, that's how I'm
Right.
thinking
Yeah.
about it in my mind, where it's like, it feels like the losses are a little bit more solidified. So 7 is a tough number. But again, the Giants were competitive in a few different games last season. Like, they beat the Eagles, right? They beat the Raiders. They
So
they
let me ask
they
you something
they
here then.
should have
This
won the Falcons game. Like, there are games
of
that they
course.
should have been in that they should have won.
Let me ask you something then on that front though, because so what is I think the equation that we're actually going to be asking ourselves is, because you would argue that last year's roster might have been in totality more talented on paper than this year's roster, right? Because you have a lot of youth, a lot of inexperience, right? So the equation that's being asked here is, will the better coaching with younger, less experienced talent be more valuable than the talent with borderline disastrous coaching, right? Like, that's a lot of what we're going to be asking. And I think the one carryover theme, true of every NFL team, is the injury factor and how those get managed. And I think that that's the thing that'll be a lot harder this year than last year, regardless of coaching, is if a couple of key players sustain injuries here. We've already seen some, but if you now have an injury to a key player, knock wood, not going to say any names, where, it's going to be, okay, that's it for us here. Now we're looking to rookies. Now we're looking to even less experienced players to step in.
Yeah, and that's the tough part, Adam, is like, the way that I think about it is injuries throw everything out the window. The Giants are a 4-win team, right? They were a 4-win team last season. So as you mentioned, the easy games on the schedule, the other teams look at us and they think the exact same thing. They're like, the Giants think they only had 4 wins. But to your point, it's an interesting kind of question of, oh, does poor coaching and putting the players in the wrong position, even though they're more veteran and talented, like,
Yeah.
really put them in a bad spot? Look, this offseason so far, it feels like we're trending in the right direction. You look at the preseason games. I know preseason doesn't mean that much, but the Giants were scoring at least in the 20s in every single one of those preseason games.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
offense looked a little bit more competent with how they were moving the
They
ball
were
down the field.
among the top yardage offensive teams in the preseason. And
Yeah,
again, the problem being that Davis Webb did a lot of that work for the Giants in
sure,
some
but
games.
but a lot of
But
that
it's
is the
still
scheme, right?
right,
A lot
right,
of that
right.
is like, this is the new scheme. That's what you're
Yeah.
asking at him. Like, Davis Webb may not be as talented as other quarterbacks, or Daniel Jones, for instance. And it's like, he's still able to manufacture points and get down the field because the offense is so creative. So that's why, to me, obviously, we know that the secondary is young and we're going to have to let them develop. It's going to take time under Wink Martindale. But it does feel like this is Daniel Jones, in his 5th year, basically. It's like, it's time for you to grab the reins and be able to handle an offense that is all predicated on you staying healthy and getting the ball out very quickly.
In his 4th year.
Yep.
Obviously. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
No, 100%. But no, but and a pivotal year for him. 100%, man. Listen, let's highlight a few things here before we get out the door. As we said, we're going to continue to feather in a lot of this conversation, our full-blown predictions. We'll get into those, and a lot of this is going to be week to week. That's what, yeah. I'm not going to be disingenuous and overstate what I think the Giants can or cannot do here. I think we need to see it on the field first, because so much of it remains a mystery, especially on the offensive side of the ball. We did not get any sample size around the starters and what we think they're going to be capable of. But just quickly here, if we could, I like this one a lot from Mike. I can't believe what the Blake cut did to some fans. You'd swear that cost us 3 games, 100%. I also like this one from Tyrone. Going to focus on coaching and execution. If this team is disciplined, they can compete. Not saying win, just overly compete. And that, I think we're getting a lot of reasonable fans following the OGP. And then last but not least here, I almost skipped right over top of him here. I'm tired of the easy scheduled predictions. When your team is garbage, there are no easy games. 100%. And while I'd like to elevate the Giants beyond garbage and maybe say that they are the wrapper that you may have thrown garbage out in, or the bag that the garbage went into before it made it to the recycling bin, I think that this team is right there at the base, right? And now every week we're going to be talking about and discussing what is possible. What are the takeaways from this game? And we hate to do it. Not about wins and losses. Do we see progress? And those are going to be building blocks that we think they can get better on as we work through the year.
Yeah, and Adam, at the end of the day, I think Tyrone said it best.
Yeah.
Another said it best. It's all about trying to compete. It's not about fully winning games yet for the Giants, because we can't. It would be brazen and crazy to say we're going to go from 4 wins to 12 wins. We're all of a sudden just going to be flourishing in this system. It's all about getting competitive. We can't have those 38-11 games against the Rams where we never had a shot. right?
Yeah,
We
no more
can't
blowout losses. Yeah, be in
we
them.
can't
Be
lose
in it.
30-10 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, like, and just completely get destroyed. We can't lose to the Eagles 34-10. Like, we cannot have 25, 30-point blowouts anymore. This team and the system and the setup is conditioned to make sure that we are not losing by 30 points anymore. And that's really, at the end of the day, what we're hoping for. Competitive games, get lucky a couple times, see if this team can build and grow together, and then see where we are halfway through the season.
Yeah, whatever you think this team can accomplish, the young players that you think can be cornerstone pieces, whoever they are, Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, right, Dexter Lawrence, any of these guys, if they are not having consistent performance, I don't mean individually, as a team, it's going to be harder and harder to think about them going forward. Some of these guys have been here for years now and having horrible results on a week-to-week basis. Need to turn it over. We will turn our attention over to the Tennessee Titans starting tomorrow. We're going to break down both sides of the football for both the New York Football Giants and the Tennessee Titans. How do we match up? Where can we take advantage? We said end of the week, betting lines, predictions, all that good stuff, guys. If you are enjoying the content, you get over to YouTube, you subscribe to the channel, you like it, you share it, you want more of it, we're going to give it to you. You get over to the podcast feed where you get those needs fulfilled as well. And as Andy Makowitz, as I say at the top, now more than ever wants, needs, and nay demands the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.